I still remember the first time someone laughed at me for being fat. I was 7 years old, standing in line for recess, when a boy behind me whispered to his friend that I looked like a balloon with legs. They both burst out laughing, and I felt something inside me shrink, like I wasn't real anymore, just something to be pointed at and made fun of. That day, I went home and didn't say a word. I just opened the fridge, grabbed a slice of leftover birthday cake, and sat in the closet, eating in silence. That became a habit. Whenever I felt small or invisible, I would eat to feel full, like food could fill the spaces where confidence should have been. My mother, bless her soul, was one of those women who thought tough love was the only kind that worked. She'd look at me with tired eyes while folding laundry and say things like, "No man wants a girl who can't see her own feet." She probably thought she was helping, motivating me to slim down or take better care of myself. But all it did was make me retreat further into my head, where I was safe, where no one could poke at my belly or laugh when I tried to run during PE and couldn't keep up. I didn't fight back. I didn't talk back. I just kept swallowing my sadness, one cookie at a time. As I got older, I found ways to disappear. Baggy clothes, quiet voice, never raising my hand in class. But I also dreamed, secretly and stubbornly. I imagined a day when someone would see me, really see me, not just my weight or the way I moved or what size jeans I wore. That dream stayed with me all through high school and college, even when nothing seemed to change. And then, at 23, I met Daniel. Daniel wasn't like the boys from school. He was calm, easy to talk to, with a warm voice that made you feel like you mattered just by being in the room. He wasn't showy or loud, didn't make jokes at other people's expense, and he never once looked at me like I was some project to fix. We met at a friend's engagement party. I was standing by the punch bowl, pretending I didn't want cake, and he just walked up and started talking about how awkward those kinds of parties were. We both laughed, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel ashamed of how I looked while doing it. It didn't take long for us to fall into something that felt like love. Looking back, maybe it was just the feeling of being chosen that swept me away. But at the time, it was everything. He held my hand in public, made me feel beautiful, told me I was smart and strong. We got married a year later, and for a while, I thought I'd found my forever. The first few years were sweet. We bought a little house on the edge of town, had late-night takeout dinners while watching crime shows, danced in the kitchen on weekends. Then came our son, Jacob. The pregnancy was rough. I gained a lot of weight, more than the doctor said was typical, but I was exhausted all the time, and food was the only thing that brought me comfort. After Jacob was born, I thought the weight would come off naturally. But it didn't. I didn't have time or energy. I barely slept. I was breastfeeding around the clock, and I still had to keep the house running because Daniel worked long hours. The pounds stayed. Then they multiplied. At first, Daniel didn't say much. Maybe he didn't notice, or maybe he did but didn't want to hurt me. But slowly, the jokes started. Small ones. Casual. Like when I asked him if a certain dress looked okay, and he chuckled, saying, "Well, it's not like you're going to a fashion show." Or when I reached for a second helping at dinner and he'd tease, "Careful, babe, I just mopped the floor." I laughed it off because what else was I supposed to do? Cry over mashed potatoes? But the jokes didn't stop. They got sharper, meaner. He started calling me Mama Bear in front of friends, and not in a cute way. When we argued, he'd throw out comments like, "Maybe if you cared as much about your health as you do about watching TV, we wouldn't be in this mess." I tried to talk to him, tell him how it made me feel, but he always brushed it off, said I was too sensitive, that he was only joking, that I needed to learn to take a little fun. The truth is, I let it go on for years, not because I didn't know it was wrong, but because I thought I deserved it. Somewhere deep down, the girl who was laughed at in school, who ate cake in closets, still believed she wasn't enough. And I was scared to be alone, scared to make a change, scared of what people would say if I walked away from my marriage just because I couldn't take a joke. So I stayed, for Jacob, for peace, for fear, and I ate to numb the pain, to forget the sting in Daniel's words, to find some kind of pleasure in a life that didn't feel like mine anymore. And as the years passed, I became almost invisible to him, except when he needed someone to mock or blame. Our son grew up and started pulling away like teenage boys do, and I counted the days. When Jacob turned 18, we threw him a small graduation party. I made his favorite chocolate cake from scratch. I watched him blow out the candles, and I smiled like any proud mother would. But that night, when I came into the kitchen to clean up, Daniel was already there, scraping frosting off the leftover cake with his finger. He looked at me, laughed, and said, "Don't worry. I saved you the big piece." Something in me snapped. Not in a loud, dramatic way. It was quiet, still. I walked upstairs, packed a single suitcase, and the next morning, I left. The first morning in my new apartment didn't feel like freedom. It felt like floating. The walls were bare, the air was stale, and the silence was so loud it rang in my ears. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a chipped mug filled with instant coffee, staring at nothing. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, waiting to feel something, anything, that would tell me I made the right choice. But all I could feel was the ache in my chest and the heaviness in my bones, like my body hadn't caught up with the fact that I'd finally left. That apartment was small. The furniture was secondhand. The view looked out onto a parking lot, and the radiator hissed like it held a grudge. But it was mine. Nobody commented on how I looked in my pajamas. Nobody rolled their eyes when I reached for a cookie, and nobody sighed when I spoke. It was quiet in a way that hurt at first, like pressing on a bruise. But over time, it became the kind of quiet that felt like space. Space to breathe, space to think, space to just exist without being judged. The first week, I barely left the apartment. I lived on cereal, microwaved soup, and frozen pizza. I watched TV on mute and fell asleep with the light on. Then one afternoon, I opened my laptop, stared at the blinking cursor, and typed in entry-level office jobs near me. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. I sent out 8 applications. 3 weeks later, I got a call back from a legal insurance firm on the other side of town. The receptionist's voice was warm, and the woman interviewing me didn't look me up and down like I was a disappointment. 2 days after that, I started my first job in nearly 2 decades. Walking into that office building for the first time felt like walking into someone else's life. Everyone moved quickly, phones ringing, printers humming, people with coffee cups and notepads rushing from one door to another. I felt like a misplaced puzzle piece, but I smiled, tucked my bag under my desk, and listened carefully when they showed me how to organize the client files. My fingers were clumsy on the keyboard, and I got nervous answering phones, but no one laughed. They gave me time, and I did everything I could not to waste it. His name was Robert. He was the managing partner. Gray at the temples, sharp blue eyes, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be taken seriously. The first time I met him, I was making copies and jammed the machine so badly that it made a sound like a dying blender. I froze, not knowing what to do. When he walked in, pressed 2 buttons, and fixed it in under 10 seconds. Then he looked at me, smiled gently, and said, "Happens to everyone." That moment stayed with me, not because he fixed the copier, but because for the first time in years, a man spoke to me like I wasn't a burden. He didn't pay me special attention, at least not at first. He was always polite, respectful, focused, but sometimes when I passed his office or brought him a file, I'd catch him looking at me, not with judgment, not with pity, but with something softer. And that terrified me, because part of me still believed I didn't deserve that softness. Part of me still saw the woman Daniel used to laugh at, still felt the sting of those cruel little comments that had become a soundtrack in my head. And that's when it started, slowly, quietly, almost without realizing it. I changed. I began walking home from work instead of taking the bus, even when it rained. I swapped frozen dinners for vegetables, not because someone told me to, but because I wanted to feel better. I joined a gym, showed up in baggy clothes, and walked on the treadmill until my legs ached. The first time I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't feel disgust, I cried, not because I looked thin or beautiful, because I looked like I was trying. And that was enough to keep going. The weight started to come off, not fast, but steady. My cheeks thinned out, my posture straightened, my clothes fit looser. Coworkers began to notice, offering kind words, asking what my secret was. And then, one day, Robert walked into the break room while I was making tea and said, "You look like you found your rhythm." I smiled, and this time it didn't feel forced. I told him I was trying something new. He nodded and said, "Whatever it is, it suits you." I carried that compliment like a necklace around my neck for the rest of the day. But life isn't a straight line. Around the same time I was finding my strength again, Daniel started reaching out. It began with short texts, "Hope you're doing okay," or "Jacob asked about you." Then came the longer messages. He said he missed me. He said the house felt empty. He said he realized he'd made mistakes, that he never stopped loving me, that he was proud of the changes I was making. I didn't respond at first. I didn't know what to say, because the truth was, some part of me still wanted to believe him. Some part of me still missed what we had in the beginning, when he held my hand and told me I was beautiful. I started dreaming about him again, not the man he became, the man he used to be, the one who stood beside me at the altar, who danced with me in the kitchen, who kissed my forehead when I cried. I'd wake up torn between two lives, the one where I kept walking forward and the one where I turned around and went back. And in the middle of all that confusion, Robert asked me out. He didn't make a big deal of it. One Friday evening, after everyone had gone home, he stopped by my desk and said, "I was thinking of trying that new Italian place on 5th. Would you like to come with me?" My heart skipped. I smiled and said yes, but inside, I felt like I was cheating on a ghost. That night was warm, with the kind of summer breeze that makes the city feel gentler. The restaurant had dim lights and soft music. Robert held the door open, pulled out my chair, and never once looked at his phone. We talked for hours about books, travel, his late wife, my childhood, the things that still scared me. He didn't flinch when I mentioned the years I spent trapped in my marriage. He just listened. That, more than anything, made me feel safe. But afterward, when I got home and opened my messages, there it was, a voicemail from Daniel, his voice cracking, telling me he couldn't sleep without me. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, listening to Daniel's voice again, even though I had already heard that message 3 times. There was something in his tone I hadn't heard in years. Regret. He sounded small, almost broken, the way I used to feel when he'd say things that stung and then brush them off with a laugh, like I was the one who didn't know how to take a joke. And for a brief moment, I wondered if this was his way of finally seeing what he had done to me, if maybe the silence of our empty house had given him time to feel what I had been feeling for the last 18 years. But then I remembered all the times I'd cried in the shower just so Jacob wouldn't hear me, all the birthdays where I smiled through the pain, all the holidays where I cooked and cleaned and played the part of a happy wife while he made little jabs about the mashed potatoes going straight to my hips. I thought about the way my body tensed every time he walked into a room, because I didn't know if I'd be met with silence, sarcasm, or some bitter joke dressed up as humor. And most of all, I thought about the way he never apologized back then, how his regret only came after I left, after I started changing, after someone else started noticing me. I didn't call him back, but I didn't delete the message either. The next few weeks were a blur of emotions, mornings filled with coffee and work, evenings with long walks and quiet dinners, and late nights where I stared at the ceiling, torn between the man who broke me and the man who saw me. Robert didn't pressure me. He didn't ask too many questions or try to rush anything. After our dinner, he simply said, "I had a nice time," and walked me to my door without expecting anything more. That gentle respect did something to me. It gave me room to feel, not out of obligation, but out of choice. We started seeing each other more often, nothing extravagant, just lunches in the park, walks after work, little moments where I could breathe without feeling judged. He liked that I laughed easily, and I liked that he listened without needing to fix anything. He once told me, "You don't have to be anyone else when you're with me," and I believed him. That, more than any compliment, made me want to be the best version of myself. Not for him, but because I was finally starting to believe I deserved it. At the same time, Daniel's presence lingered like a shadow. He sent flowers to my office once. White lilies, my favorite, though I never told him that. Maybe he guessed, maybe he remembered from years ago. There was no card, just my name on the envelope and a note that read, "Still thinking of you." My hands trembled as I read it, and I hated that a part of me still wanted to hold on to the version of him I had loved. But the truth was, that version of him hadn't existed in a long time, and I was no longer the woman who thought she had to stay small to be loved. I kept working, kept showing up to the gym, kept cooking meals that nourished me instead of numbing me. My body changed. My face grew sharper, my waist slimmer, my energy higher. People noticed. Even Jacob, when he came home from college for Thanksgiving, stared at me for a long moment before saying, "Mom, you look incredible." That made me cry, not because I needed his approval, but because I finally saw myself through someone else's eyes and didn't flinch. One afternoon, Robert asked if I wanted to come with him to a small business retreat upstate. It wasn't formal, just a weekend getaway with a few other firm partners. He said I didn't have to decide right away, but that he'd like me there, and not just as a colleague. I told him I'd think about it. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it spin and hum, and thought about all the rooms I had spent my life hiding in. Rooms filled with silence, shame, and fear. And now, here I was, in a space of my own, with a door I could open or close whenever I wanted. The next day, I told Robert yes. We drove up together, just the two of us, through winding country roads and trees shedding golden leaves. The air was crisp, the sky a soft gray, and for the first time in years, I felt something like peace. At the retreat, I watched Robert speak in meetings, lead discussions, and handle tough conversations with grace. He carried himself with quiet confidence, never arrogant, always open. One evening, we sat by a fire pit after dinner, wrapped in blankets, sipping red wine, and he looked at me and said, "I hope you know how proud I am of you." That's when I knew, not just that I had feelings for him, but that I had finally crossed over into a version of myself I never thought I'd meet. The version who wasn't afraid to be seen, who didn't need to hide behind food or fear or fake smiles. And when he reached out and took my hand, I didn't pull away. I leaned in. A few days later, back in the city, I called Daniel, not to argue, not to cry, just to speak the truth. He answered quickly, like he had been waiting by the phone. "I'm not coming back," I said, calmly, firmly. "You had me for almost 20 years, and I stayed even when I shouldn't have. But now I know what it feels like to be loved without shame, without judgment, and I won't give that up. Not for guilt, not for memories, and not for someone who only learned my worth when he finally lost it." He was quiet for a long moment before whispering, "I'm sorry." And maybe he was, but it didn't change anything. I filed for divorce the next week. About 6 months after I signed the divorce papers, my body had changed so much I barely recognized myself in the mirror. And not just on the outside. Sure, I had muscle definition where there used to be softness, and my waist was the smallest it had ever been, but it was my posture, the way I carried myself, that shocked me most. I looked like a woman who owned the room now, like someone who didn't apologize for existing. And when I walked into that dance studio for the first time, I could feel heads turning, not in a flashy way, but in that quiet, curious way men look at you when you know who you are. It was a friend from work who convinced me to try the salsa class. I laughed at first. Me? Dancing? I'd spent most of my adult life trying to hide my body, not show it off on a wooden floor in front of mirrors and strangers. But something in me was hungry for more. Not just the gym, not just green smoothies and Pilates. I wanted to feel alive, to move to music, to do something just because it made me smile. That's where I met Marco. He was younger, 32, maybe 33, with dark, wavy hair, sharp cheekbones, and the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He had this playful energy, full of life and rhythm, and he wore tight black shirts and leather bracelets that should have looked ridiculous, but didn't. The first time he spun me around the floor, I almost tripped, not because of the steps, but because of the way he held my gaze when I landed back in front of him. "You've got good balance," he said, with a crooked smile. I wanted to laugh. "You should have seen me 5 years ago. I like the version I'm seeing now." I blushed, not because I wasn't used to compliments anymore, but because he meant it, and he knew I knew. From that day on, things got blurry. He gave me extra attention in class, subtle touches on my back when correcting my form, soft encouragement when I hesitated with the rhythm. Once, after class, he walked me to my car and told me about a new tapas bar that had Latin nights every Friday. "We should go," he said, eyes full of fire. "Just dance. No mirrors, no rules." I agreed, then canceled, then agreed again the next week, then canceled again. I told myself it was because I was busy, tired, working late, but the truth was, I didn't trust myself. I wasn't afraid of Marco. I was afraid of how easy it was to be tempted. Robert had never made me feel insecure. He was calm, mature, stable, the kind of man who gave you peace, not butterflies. And for a long time, I thought peace was all I wanted. But Marco stirred something else. That wildness I'd buried. That girl who used to dream about being seen and desired. One evening, after class, He walked me to my car again. "You keep running," he said softly, leaning against the driver's side door. "But I know you want to stop." I didn't deny it. I just smiled and said, "I'm not a girl you play with, Marco." He stepped closer, eyes gentle. "I don't play with women, especially not ones like you." That night, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone. I could have texted him. I could have said yes. I could have gone out, danced with him, kissed him under city lights, and felt that rush of being wanted by someone half the age of my ex. But I didn't, not because I didn't want to, but because for the first time in my life, I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I turned off my phone and went to bed early. The next morning, I walked into work feeling light. Robert brought me coffee, like he always did, and when he asked if I wanted to take a walk at lunch, I said yes. As we walked through the park, I told him about the dance class and about Marco. Not everything, but enough. He didn't look threatened. He just smiled and said, "I'd like to see you dance sometime." And that was it. No jealousy, no games, just quiet confidence. That was the moment I knew the difference. Marco made me feel like I was on fire. Robert made me feel like I was home. And I didn't need fire anymore. I'd lived through that already. It had been almost a year since I packed that small suitcase and walked away from a life where I felt more like a shadow than a woman. And now, standing in front of my mirror in that deep burgundy satin dress, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, though I did, but because of how I felt inside. I stood taller, I smiled easier, and most of all, I didn't second-guess whether I deserved to be seen. The night of the dance showcase was crisp and golden, that kind of autumn air that carries just enough chill to make you feel alive. The city sparkled as we drove through it. Robert behind the wheel in his classic navy suit, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting near mine. Close, but not rushed, like everything about him. Steady, respectful, warm. The studio had been transformed into a glowing ballroom. Soft lights strung above, a small jazz trio playing in the corner, long tables with finger food and wine, and couples slowly moving to the rhythm on the hardwood floor. As soon as we walked in, people turned, not to stare, not in shock, but with something warmer. Admiration, recognition. I wasn't just the woman who changed. I was the woman who came back to life. Marco spotted us quickly. He looked good, as always. Tight black shirt, sleeves rolled up, jaw sharp, energy electric. He greeted us both, polite as ever, but his eyes lingered on me just a little longer. And for a moment, I could feel the tension in the air. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that happens when you both know a door was left unlocked but never opened. "And that's okay." I smiled, leaned into Robert's side, and said softly, "Let's dance." We weren't great. Robert had 2 left feet and I still missed a beat every now and then. But we laughed, and we moved, and we held each other like it mattered more than getting the steps right. Around us, younger women twirled, heels clicking, hair bouncing, and yet I didn't feel like I needed to compete or shrink or prove anything. I wasn't the girl sitting alone in the corner anymore. I was the woman on the floor, alive in her own skin, spinning to her own rhythm. And somewhere between the turns and the music and the feeling of his hand on my back, my mind drifted, uninvited but somehow welcome, back to a memory I hadn't thought about in years. I was 10. It was the last day of school before summer break, and I had worn shorts for the first time all year. I was proud of myself, until one of the boys yelled across the lunch table that my thighs clapped when I walked. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. And then I went to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and cried into my sleeve, promising myself I'd never wear shorts again. That summer, I stayed inside. I read books. I ate snacks. I disappeared. For years after that, every decision I made was shaped by fear of being seen, of being mocked, of being too much. So I tried to be less. And in doing so, I lost the loudest, brightest parts of myself. And now I wear dresses with slits that show my legs. I speak in meetings without apologizing. I go to the beach. I laugh loudly. I take up space. And if anyone has a problem with it, that's not mine to carry anymore. The truth is, if you spend your whole life trying not to be noticed, you'll miss the moment when someone finally looks at you and sees everything you are. And if you're listening to this right now, and you've ever hated your body or avoided your own reflection or told yourself that you'll be happy when you lose the weight or fix your face or earn someone else's approval, please stop. Please don't wait as long as I did. Start now. Start small. Start scared, but start because your health, your peace, your worth, they're not rewards you have to earn by suffering. They're yours already. You just have to believe it long enough to act on it. Yes, I had to change my eating. Yes, I had to move my body. And yes, there were nights when I wanted nothing more than to crawl back into old habits and let the numbness take over. But I didn't. I kept going, not because it was easy, but because I finally understood that loving myself meant doing what was hard, consistently, quietly, until the life I dreamed of became the life I lived. And it wasn't just my body that transformed. At the firm, things took off. After Robert gave me that share, I took it seriously. I studied. I asked questions. I stayed late. Within months, I built a new client intake system that improved our case turnaround by 25%. I mentored 2 younger women who reminded me of who I used to be. Afraid, soft-spoken, unsure. One of them just got promoted last month, and when she thanked me, she said, "You're the kind of woman I want to be when I'm your age." That hit me hard, because for most of my life, I didn't want to be who I was. I didn't want to be seen. And now, here I was, someone's role model, someone's inspiration. Me. Toward the end of the night, after the music slowed and the guests began trickling out, Marco approached me with 2 glasses of sparkling water. He handed me one, raised his, and said, "To the one who made every head turn tonight." I chuckled. "You're exaggerating." He leaned in, eyes soft. "Not even a little. There was a time I would have blushed, gotten flustered, maybe even flirted back, but tonight, I simply smiled, clinked my glass with his, and said, "Thank you, Marco. Really, for everything." His gaze lingered for a second too long, but then he nodded, stepped back, and watched as Robert returned to my side and wrapped his arm gently around my waist. And just like that, the chapter closed. We walked home slowly, hand in hand, the city quiet and golden under the streetlights. As we reached our building, Robert looked at me, really looked, and said, "You shine. You know that?" And I whispered, "I know. I just had to remember how." He smiled. "I'm glad you did." That night, as I stood on the balcony, wrapped in a robe, sipping peppermint tea, I looked up at the sky and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete. Not perfect. Not fearless. Not finished, but whole. And for a woman who spent half her life feeling like she had to earn love by disappearing, being whole is more than enough.